Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Movement Building from Home community calls. So we're in week one. We're going to talk about online meetings. And my name's Abby. I'm one of the organizers together with Chad. Chad can give you a wave. Yay. So we both work on the MozFest team, and we really wanted to set up this series of calls to really meet a need that's happening right now as many people are shifting to online meetings and online conferences. And we want to share what we've done for this kind of work, but also hear from all of you and just create this convening where we can learn from each other. So I hope you all have the notes. We'll be following the agenda here. So please sign your name in the roll call, and you can add your social media just so we have a way to follow up with you, or for other people, if they want to keep chatting with you afterwards, they can check there. And our opening question is, how are you doing today? What are you working on? What do you need from this call? And we're conscious that things are different all around the world. So if you can't make this, it's totally fine. You can watch the recording. You can participate as much or as little as you can. So yeah, thanks for filling out some of these check-in questions. Liz, trying to maintain a culture of connectedness. Miss being together. Yeah, it's hard. So thank you for doing that hard work, Liz. Cool. And with that, oh yes, we are here in Zoom. I'd encourage you to try the gallery view. I know most of you are face muted, but it is fun if you want to see everyone. There's in the top right-hand corner of Zoom, you can switch between speaker view and gallery view. And I feel like that's a nice way to sort of feel like you're more connected when you can see at least everyone's avatars all at once. So you know who, you're not just talking to a blank screen. These notes in the Google Doc are for you. So please write in them. Feel free to use them to take notes, to ask questions, +1 things you agree with, add GIFs, comments, emojis. We love all of that. So don't be afraid that you're writing in the wrong place or using the notes wrong. And oh yeah, thanks for putting on your video. I appreciate it. As someone who's speaking to avatars, it is nice to see your faces. And with that, I'll pass it to Chad.
Thanks. We'll also begin each call with a reminder of the community participation guidelines we have here in this Mozilla space. We're here to be respectful, honest, inclusive, accommodating, appreciative, and open to learning from everyone else. We will not attack, demean, disrupt, harass, or threaten others, or encourage any such behavior. Here, I think we're on page 2 now. Near line 62, if you have it, is a link to the full Mozilla Community Participation Guidelines for your review. And if there's something you'd like to discuss further, or if an issue comes up, you can report either to Abby or to me, or we can find someone, or you can find someone at Mozilla as well to report to if you're not comfortable doing that. Abby, you want to talk a little bit about today's goals?
Yes. So goals of the call, we're agenda number 3 now. We really wanted to check in with all of you, with our community, and hold space to listen to each other. I just know it can be hard as we're sheltering in place. So it's nice to have community still. Share advice for successful online meetings, both us sharing advice and hearing from you. And to understand the challenges and opportunities online meetings bring to movement building. Yeah, because it's a completely different medium, and seeing how can we continue the work that we've been doing, and can this actually inform the work we do going forward. Back to Chad.
Yeah, and so to begin there, we're going to do a little bit of sharing about our communities and experiences so far in this new space. And we're going to start with silent documenting. And just by way of explanation, when we talk about silent documenting, which we call it silent etherpadding on Etherpad, we call it silent documenting, we take a few minutes, say 5 or so that everyone on the call has a chance to reflect and respond and to share a few insights from their own experience. Folks can then +1 each other's comments. They can kind of ask some questions to help unpack new terms or new ideas, or to connect with folks facing similar challenges, let's say. But we'll take about 5 minutes. And if you'd like to do this out loud, you can speak and I will take notes for you. You can also just type. We'll take about 5 minutes and share some thinking in response to these 2 prompts. What's working well so far in your online meetings in this new space? And then what are the challenges you face in these meetings? All right, those are the 2 prompts. Any questions? I'm putting my timer
on. Are people able
to
hear Chad properly?
Yay.
Okay.
Good check. Earlier today, that was not the case. We'll take those 5 minutes. After you've kind of shared what you'd like to share, take a look and +1 the things you're also experiencing, ask those questions, And after 5, we'll come back together to kind of summarize some trends, or folks can lift things up, surface things, bookmark things they want to discuss further. All right? Back in 5. We've got some typing still going. If you've gone ahead and kind of shared your ideas, it's a great time to +1 and ask questions. If things slow down too much further, we'll go ahead and go right to discussion, but we've got about 2 minutes left. So if something comes to mind, or if this is your first chance to scan other responses and respond, please go ahead and take that. All right, that's about time. If you're wrapping up a thought or a response or still +1ing, please go ahead, continue and and finish that. But I wanted to take another few minutes here just to open up the conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to vocalize or surface or draw our attention to discuss further, to bookmark for later? What strikes you about these successes and challenges so far? And anyone can start it at any time.
I guess I'm struck a little bit by how I think we're all defaulting to video conferencing, I think here, because the question is really about online meetings. And clearly this is a main way that many of us are doing it. So I just wanted to notice that.
Yep. Abby will talk a little bit about other platforms, other purposes, other contexts later on as well, and invite others to do the same. Yeah. Great observation.
It's really interesting. None of the other calls called that out, but it is true. And I'll say in the earlier days, we wouldn't have the video portion. We would just be conference call line, but we'd have the shared notes. And I found that worked just well. But it is nice to see people.
Other observations? Oh, please.
One thing that I didn't put in there because I didn't think of it at the time, but I find I work with a lot of people from like undergrad students all the way up through like tenured professors, and there are different expectations of like behavior and engagement, and like whether or not you have your video on or off, and like whether or not you have kids at home, and all of those types of things that are very different in the virtual space versus when you're all in your, you know, business finery sitting around a table.
Yes, we had just smirking. We had a really cool conversation on our Slack, our community Slack last weekend, earlier this week, kind of about exactly that, and like different expectations of formality and other things in online spaces.
For us, it's a little bit different in the COVID-19 era because people who would not be worrying about their home bandwidth or would not have their kids there, they don't have the same resources. And so, so we've all kind of made accommodations that feel very new, even if we have been doing virtual meetings before. This is in response to Dylan's point.
Yeah, and I saw Brenda put digital etiquette in the chat. Like, I've never heard that term. That sounds, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Something we've been doing in New York is helping community boards go virtual for their meetings. And we had to, the main point of it was to sort of translate the etiquette of a community board meeting to Zoom or whatever software. So like recognizing that there's an etiquette that existed beforehand and transferring it to whatever makes most sense for your group after in the virtual world.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and setting those expectations and getting that shared understanding at the beginning really helps you move forward.
Anything else? We maybe have time for one more share if anyone would like to surface anything else.
Something, I don't know if it came up here as much, but just it does feel like we're connecting people more personally. Like you're seeing their kids, their pets. I can hear people cooking near Chad right now.
It's my kid and my pet's barking. Yeah.
That like we normally wouldn't get to see. So it is nice to see a fuller view of the person. Yeah.
The teachers I work with have been mentioning that too. I mean, there's all sorts of problems connecting with kids, but they are able to actually see their kids suddenly in this like new light when the connections work. That's a big caveat, but just.
Which also puts a lot of pressure on, it could put a lot of pressure on you to always bring yourself to the meeting. And I don't know, that's a good thing probably, but I don't know, I'm sure it could also be bad.
Yeah, learning, right? The new nuances, the new etiquettes, the new reading, maybe when someone is like super happy everyone's sharing and someone is maybe not quite ready to share in that way is all emergent. And so paying attention to it is an important thing to do, kind of regardless of what's exactly right for you and your community. That's the time there. I think brought up great things, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to them and discuss them a little bit further in some of our smaller group conversations or breakout rooms later on. But Abby's going to take over now and just describe for a while our approach to running online meetings and some of the things we think about before you have an opportunity to share the things you think about and your approaches with each other afterwards. Abby?
Well, thanks. Yeah, and I just want to say thanks to you for how you all showed up there, and like even the discussion that was starting around like long talkers and just sharing advice with each other. I really appreciate that. But for a little bit about how Mozilla approaches this, first up, we have accessible platforms. And I think we touched on this a little bit, but really assessing your community needs for privacy and safety, but then also accessibility too. We chose Zoom for this because it is a platform that we use internally at Mozilla, so we already have the infrastructure set up for it, but it does handle larger groups better than most other platforms we found, and we've tested out a few. And we did know that these were going to be public calls. We are recording this, it will be uploaded online. If people did have issues with privacy and security, we're inviting people to like watch the recordings and then interact with the docs afterwards, or even have separate meetings with us. But it is about like understanding which platform you use and what risks you're taking for each platform. So if I was having a really truly sensitive conversation, I'd probably choose Signal instead of Zoom. If I wanted like something truly open source, go with Jitsi if it's a smaller group. And so we added a few video conferencing options. Feel free to keep adding more. I know the past couple calls, if you scroll down, people were adding things I hadn't even thought of or even come across. So please share your own knowledge there. And there is an article listed in our resources section that just compares a few of the video conferencing platforms if you're trying to choose like pros and cons. So just know anything you choose, there are trade-offs, and just like be conscious of that when you are like the content you're sharing in that space. So like on WhatsApp, I'll use that to connect with my friends, but I'm not gonna like do something very sensitive there. I'd choose like Signal for that. So just like know where you are. And then for collaborative notes, we do find these notes are super important for how we run meetings and engaging people. So we use Google Docs. In the past, we've used Etherpad, but we did have some security issues there. But I do love Etherpad if you have access to a version of that. And HackMD is also really great if you know Markdown. I think that's another good one. So there's a few options you can use. I know if you're working with anyone in China, Google Docs can be really tricky. They'll have to install a VPN. But yeah, many options. The security issues with Etherpad, there were some issues with our instance at Mozilla that we stopped using it, but also the fact that it was so open, it was really hard to close things off or change permissions. So there were a couple cases where we were sharing an Etherpad quite broadly, and then someone would add a link, and then that link would suddenly be promoted as part of what we were doing. And we're like, oh, that's not what we want people to see. So this way with Google Docs, we can share the doc broadly, and right now it's open for everyone to edit and use. But if we see some abuse happening, it's easy for us to close off the permissions. And that way we can control sort of what people are seeing. So that was one of the issues with Etherpad. We still have an instance now. We put up a new instance that we use. It gets deleted every couple of days, I think. I can't remember the timeline. So you can use that for like real-time meetings as the notes, but then afterwards you want to move it somewhere else to preserve it. We just wanted to keep everything in Google Docs for ease in this case. Yeah, there's a few other notes. And then for chat, we use Slack, but there are a lot of open source alternatives with Matrix, Mattermost. Gitter is great for its GitHub integration. Signal, I've already mentioned, also good for privacy and security. And yeah, Marco Polo, oh yeah, House Party. Thanks for adding some stuff. Crowdcast conferences. I installed Marco Polo the other day. I don't know if I get it, but I installed it. So we'll see. We'll see how that works. Cool, thanks. So for the next part, we're gonna go through a few of the practices we normally use in our online calls. You may recognize them as things we've already done in this call, but I thought we'd call them out and talk a little bit about them. And feel free to ask questions or even unmute. We're a nice small group today, which it's nice. You can actually ask all your questions. But we do like to start with a roll call as a check-in. So this is a nice way to invite people to actually write in the doc. A lot of times people see an agenda and think it's not for them to edit or hack. But this really shows that, yeah, you can change it. You can even add an agenda item if you really wanted to. So letting people do that. And it lets people share things like their pronouns and their location in a nice, unobtrusive way. And it's a good way to be able to follow up with people afterwards. So if you meet someone in a breakout room and you want to connect, if they've shared their social media, you can find them afterwards and keep that conversation going. So to do that. And it's nice for people who are also coming in later who maybe couldn't make the call, maybe they're in a different time zone. This way they can see who was there and catch up with everything. Yes. Next one is providing multiple forms of contribution. That's having this agenda again. So people can contribute by text. And that's why we have like the silent documenting piece to really stop and like let everyone write in the document. It is a lot more time efficient than asking everyone to unmute and share their thoughts. And a lot of people like to think first before they share anyways. So this provides like some of that introvert time to sit and think and write it down before you share. We do like to follow it up with like verbal sharing if we can, like we did today, where you can highlight some of the patterns. And oh yeah, thanks Chad for being the note taker. I appreciate it. And then also in terms of multiple forms of contribution, it is good to have a designated note taker or some sort of co-facilitator at the very least. Shared facilitation notes. That's true. Shared facilitation notes are great. But if you have someone who's note-taking so that other people can be discussing, it helps with these different modes of contribution and just how people process things differently. Yeah, did you have a question, Christina?
I was just going to say that I find this on the documenting, allowing people to have that time to write, you also capture so much more than you would just opening the floor for discussion. And so I go back and I use those notes, you know, like I'll read it later because it's actually it's much more of a document and I send it back out. I mean, as you all do too, but I just find it's good for people thinking, but it's also good to capture much more than you could otherwise.
Yeah, 100%. I think our first call, I can't remember how many people actually showed up, Chad, maybe like 40. I may have made that
I can
number
tell you exactly.
Okay, thanks.
35.
35. So like we would not have been able to have 35 people unmute and then share. But we did get 35 people writing down their answers to that. And even if they didn't write it down, they could have plus one a couple other things. So we still sort of got their voice. So yeah, you can capture so much more.
And that's something we didn't call out on this call, but I think is when you have a group like that, as you're getting towards the tail end of the time for contributing in that way, it's really great just to acknowledge and encourage people to do those plus ones. Like if you're having trouble thinking of something to share, maybe just go through and plus one and really affirm others. That's a great contribution too. Just you know, make sure to acknowledge and really appreciate that even though plus ones seem like, oh, there's a plus one, like that can be a powerful thing for people to see next to their ideas.
For sure. On the next point, we have the asynchronous contribution. I know we talked about timing a little bit in the share outs earlier. What we often do, if we have to move on to the next agenda item, but people still have questions or want to keep talking about something, we let them continue talking in the notes separately so that the call can continue moving forward, but they're still able to discuss. And it is great having these notes for people who are coming in afterwards. They can come in and ask all their questions, maybe tag a few people, and then that kind of asynchronous contribution can happen. But it is nice to have something standalone so it's not just what's happening verbally in the meeting where people are unmuted. And then,
I'm wondering one quick thing. It's not about the asynchronous contribution necessarily, but I noticed that Chad in particular is like labeling his contributions with Chad : thing. Is that the best way you've found of identifying who contribute? Because I mean, I can think of, I don't know, everybody choosing a text color and having a legend or something like that in order to see like who's doing what. Sometimes it's not important and it's just, you know, that the content is there, but sometimes let's say someone writes something down and like, that's a really good idea. I want to follow up with who did that, but I don't know who it is that actually said it. And suggestion mode on Google Docs often makes things look pretty like messy.
Yeah, and I feel like that makes things load slower, and it has a lower capacity for the suggestion mode. We did have a few people who tried that. I do think, yeah, putting the name is one of the easier ways. When you do the font change, you'd have to reset it every time you're writing, so it slows people down a little bit because it just takes on the font of wherever your new cursor location is. But what you can do if people didn't write their name, Google's view history will let you see who has written it. It takes a bit of time and you have to like click through, especially if like 100 people are editing something at once.
Right.
It's a little tricky. But we do try to encourage people to write their name. We weren't really explicit with it here, but in certain other calls, we try to model it with putting our name there so that it's a little bit easier for people to follow up with comments. Yeah.
That's why I do it, since I'm like a facilitator of record and co-host for these calls. People know I'm here, so if there's something I want to respond to or something I want to invite others to respond to, I'll tag it with my name. But it's kind of like what I've been reading about digital etiquette, as Brenda pointed out, in some articles about like camera on. Like some people encourage it as a norm, but it's never a requirement. And I would never really, I wouldn't necessarily, I guess I would have a sense in the community, whether it's a team at work or a community organization, or let's say working with a population, maybe on a whole nother platform, right? That might be harmed by current technologies rolling out, things like that. It's not something I would ever require. It's something I would absolutely discourage in places where it would be harmful to participants. But here, I think, I should assume like really what is for me a low risk of just like labeling my things so people have an easy point of contact if they want to continue a conversation.
And I guess there are probably different levels of norm creation there that you can establish at the very beginning. You can say like, it's important in this meeting, or people might want to follow up, so it'd be a good idea to put it there. Or, if you have an idea that someone else might want to follow up on, then put your name, or so there are different levels of creating those norms.
Yep. Yeah. Or having you could pair this with like, let's say Signal, and say, if you'd like to know who said something to ask a follow-up question, group chat on Signal.
Cool. Thank you.
And keep that record off of the shared document.
Yeah, and I'll say for the shared documents, different platforms will handle this differently. So Etherpad would write it in different colors for the different people. And if you hovered over, you could see who wrote it. Dropbox Paper, I think, does something similar. I forgot to write that in there as one of the options. Yeah. So there are platforms you could use if that's really important to you. Cool. Just a couple more things. There's robust documentation for this because we wanted it to be as accessible as possible. We are recording this. We will be using the auto captioning system with YouTube. We got Zoom's auto caption back for some of the other ones, and there's some fun misspeaks. Auto captions are fun. And then also summarizing on other channels. So if we want people, like we'll be emailing you all on Friday with the recording, an invitation to next week. And yeah, if we knew that certain people couldn't make it, we would summarize what happened and send it to them so that they could come back and add their own questions and tag people as necessary.
I just asked a question about captioning. So have you decided you turn off Zoom captioning, and then when you upload to YouTube, you turn it on there? Is that how you manage
We actually have it on for both. We're still figuring out captioning.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so
I was playing with Zoom's captioning the other day, and I couldn't actually figure it wasn't working, so I wasn't sure what was going on.
I know a couple of weeks ago when there's like that big Zoom spike, the captions would take like 3 or 4 days to show up. Like I don't think they're live. Yeah.
Okay.
But for this morning's call, they showed up like 10 minutes after. So it's not live captioning. And then when you upload to YouTube, you can also check off the auto caption again. And I don't know if you can upload caption. You probably can. I just haven't researched this.
Okay.
But that's what we've been doing. So we're having 2 different systems auto caption at work, and we'll see. We might change that for next week once we learn how to caption things properly. Yes, you will be doing breakout rooms soon, but we find that is a great way to actually hear from everyone. I know this is a call where we actually could hear from everyone, but some of the previous calls, it would have been impossible. So it's a nice way also for our community to connect with each other. I'm sure you're all working on things that align with each other somehow and may be able to support and help each other. So we want to help facilitate those kinds of connections. And then always have like clear call to actions, next steps, and to-dos, like any good agenda. So making sure you know what people are doing next and what people are doing afterwards. Cool, Q&A time. We already asked a couple questions. Any more questions on what we had?
One thing I love about how you guys run calls is you really make sure that people are engaged and kind of like accountable, but in the most positive way, not in the kind of like kind of way. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about just sort of like helping everyone to show up and participate and not just sort of be like, you know, just on their phone or what have you.
Yeah, I do like to start with that like kind of icebreaker opening question, just to show that we are listening to you and sort of get people used to being on a Zoom call and having notes. I know it can be a lot, so this is like a little easing into it. And then before we deliver any content, I do like to ask and hear from the audience first. So that's why we had that silent documenting, sorry, I'm still in my old verbiage, the silent documenting time to hear like what's worked and what hasn't worked for all of you. And that helps shape the rest of the call. And it makes sure you feel heard. So we are listening to your input and then actually incorporating it later if we can. We deliver something. And then I think breakout rooms are always magical. Yeah. Anything to add, Chad? Oh no, he's typing notes.
Yeah. So I think over time as well, I think we've developed a lot of trust and community and kind of shared practices, and we learn from others. So people, I think, find some familiar online meeting practices when they spend time in calls that we might convene or facilitate. And in that way, folks who've been on these calls and who know kind of the happy collisions that can happen can kind of catalyze others just by modeling participation right off the bat. I think that happens quite often and is a wonderful aspect of this community. For breakout rooms, I think giving really clear prompts. I don't know, I've not asked or interviewed people about this, and I probably should because we do it on every call. I don't know if our CPG reminders help people feel, like more comfortable or like, someone has their back to participate right off the start. I think it's a mix of structural things, specific things, and then community experience and wisdom that everyone brings to these calls and helps share with newcomers.
Yeah, I forgot to mention with breakout rooms, we like to have 2 to 3 prompts, groups of 3 to 4. When it's a group of 2, there's a good chance one of you won't have audio working. So 3 to 4 is a nice way. For like 10 to 15 minutes, we find that's a pretty good formula. Yeah, and just generally, I think people learn best if they can come to the conclusion themselves. So that's like why we want to keep people engaged, so that you're coming to your own conclusions and it's not just us force feeding you info.
I had a question on do you see a difference in having online meetings with people who don't know each other yet and people who do know each other, and how do you like deal with these differences?
Chad.
And I guess another follow-up question at the same time is also, when people don't know each other, usually like in offline meetings, people build connections also within the breaks and like by just talking with the 2 of them or just saying hello, like these smaller personal interactions, and you don't have that like of course you can signal each other or have another call in the meantime, but I feel like that's a bigger step. So there's like, do you have any experiences with that or lessons that you could share?
Abby, do you want to share first or shall I?
You could go ahead.
Okay. So my short answer is like, I feel like as a facilitator, I feel like I cheat. Like I feel like on calls like this and our experience with them, we do the roll call, we do the check-in, we try to get folks interacting during silent documenting. People might not know names yet, but like there's this atmosphere of it's okay to share things with everyone here because I'm going to get great questions and +1s back. We're really hard to cultivate that so that by the time we get to breakout rooms and you do meet those 2 to 3 people whose names you're going to remember, you're going to remember maybe where they live, who they work for. You're going to follow up with them, go back to the notes later on, find their social media handle. Like, I'm not sure this is just me riffing here. I'm not sure an upfront investment in a large online meeting of 20 people introducing themselves will create the same kind of connections as jumping into dialogue together and then 2 to 3 deeper connections on the breakout rooms. So I would rather bet on an overall culture of interaction and safety and inclusion and personal connections in breakout rooms than on a large scale introduction at the beginning of a call. And I could be totally wrong, and I'm sure it's contextual by audience and community, but those are the bets I make, and that's how I cheat. If that's helpful or helpful not to follow.
Yeah, that rings true for me too. I think it also depends on what the large call is. We'll do introductions if we know that this group is going to be meeting regularly over the next few months. But for groups like this, where it's only for a few weeks, we didn't want to lose that time to introductions. We thought it was better to have the breakout rooms and to create that culture of sharing. Although with this group, we probably could have done introductions. Congratulations, smallest group. Did that answer your question? Okay. I think now's a good time to move on to the breakouts we've been talking so much about.
Yes, and I think we are probably to do this and to have a little time to share afterwards, though it says 15 minutes for the breakout rooms here. We'll try to do around 10 or 12, 5 to share and 5 to wrap up. So that'll be the rest of the call. Has anyone never done a breakout room before? First time breakout room, great, fantastic. Please let us know what the experience is like for you in our follow-up survey after the call. But breakout rooms are, just smaller rooms within a larger call. So people form into groups. Hosts can set these groups up ahead of time. They can assign folks to groups, or it can be randomized, and you can tell Zoom like how many people you would like per room, and it will auto divide. And you can pull people out like the hosts who can stay here in this room, the main room as it's called. Now, for these rooms, remember the CPG, Community Participation Guidelines, are in effect. But on these calls, we've also been reminding people, right? Like the purpose of these breakout rooms is to listen, to thank each other for sharing, and like to share our own experiences. It's not a time for judgment or solutioneering or getting back to someone what they should have been doing or no wonder they had that problem. This is not the place for that or the time. And we know there are all kinds of ways of getting feedback around the world, some of which are very direct. We're asking everyone in these breakout rooms to use a common denominator of kindness on this series of calls. It's also a reminder to just share what you feel comfortable sharing. You can pass on any prompt, that's fine. And if you need help technically or facilitation or something, there's a button at the bottom that says, ask for help, and that will pull Abby or me or whoever your host is into the room to help you out. But what we'd like you to do in the next 10 minutes or so in these rooms is to go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself to any new friends you might be meeting. Share who are you, kind of where you're from. It can be very general, it can be a region, it doesn't have to be your address or anything. And maybe what brings you to this call. And then if you can and you have time, share a success from this week, share a challenge from this week, and then perhaps most importantly, share a strength that you've discovered since shifting to work this way, either in yourself or in your colleagues or your community that maybe you didn't know was there before, that you're definitely going to carry forward past this time of uncertainty. Okay, so the prompts are introduce yourself, share a success, share a challenge, and share a strength you've discovered. Any questions about this? All right, we'll do 10 minutes and I'll bug you every 3 minutes or so to switch speakers.
All right. So it'll be a 9-minute countdown. You'll have an extra minute at the end. And I'm creating them now.
My phone's on 1%, so I don't know what
It's okay. I have the countdown. It's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna go get my charger and plug it in.
Go for it. I'm gonna make more too. Cool. I hope you all enjoyed your breakout rooms. Chad, were you going to say something?
No, just suggest maybe we did what we did on the earlier call with share a thing plus one a thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, close time. So in the shared insights section, there's 3 questions. What did we discover? How can we help each other? What knowledge and resources do we have to share? And I'd say share one thing from those prompts and plus one thing. So I'll give you a few minutes to go do that. Or even just general insights. You can just put it in the notes section if it doesn't fit in that prompt.
Yep. You can come back and add more and plus one more later on. We just want to be sure to finish the agenda on time today and make sure everyone gets out at the top of the hour. These are great.
Yeah, these are really nice.
This note about empathy is something I've heard a lot of people talk about, how quickly people kind of like come together in ways that folks didn't think were quite possible or likely beforehand across a number of settings is something that's shown up in different parts of my life quite a bit. It's a nice observation. Plus one. Anything to observe here, Abby? Anything you want to bring up before we go on to closing the call?
No, I just want to say thanks for these great insights. Yeah, I feel like these are much meatier than some other calls around like empathy, sharing workload. So it's really nice. Thanks for having these conversations.
Yeah, and there's a great question at the end that might get repeated as a peer assist further on down the line. But if there are specific activities you find that help people connect online, support folks online, please go ahead and share them at the top of page 7 there for from whoever asked that question. It's a great one. So we're going to close each call, a little closing kind of circle where we'll share some reminders. That's also a section where you can put reminders. You can let people know what's going on with your community. Share invitations to go and do things that you have coming up as well. There's a section for shares and shout outs. This is really supposed to be a space, maybe we should rename it, for gratitude. So if there are people in your life, people in your community, people at your work who are making things kind of like not necessarily easy right now, but easier, this is a great place to put it there. So shout outs and expressions of gratitude for people who are helping you, who are making a difference right now and helping you make a difference right now. Just space for peer assists. If you're running a project and you need contributors, if you want to connect with more people doing similar work, if you want to follow up with someone, have a chat after this call, that's a good place to write that. After this kind of closing circle bit, we are going to share resources with you every week. These are relatively current, things that have come up very recently. Of course, for many of the topics we'll cover, like community care, there's a deep, rich history there that could take a lifetime of scholarship really to get into, to learn more and more and more about. But we're going to look for things that are coming across feeds right now, invite you to share those things as well, and share some weekly resources that have to do with our topics. There's one in there today, building virtual rooms for online participation from Training for Change. If you're curious maybe about going from a Google Doc to using slides for more interactive activities, that's a cool one to check out. There are some ways to stay involved with Mozilla at the end there, including probably a reiteration of the invitation you should have gotten by email to join our Slack. Keep the conversations going there in the MozFest community. And finally, there's a link to our feedback survey, which is also under reminders. We use our feedback surveys between calls and between weeks to make things better for you. We're really serious about responding in as real time as possible to do whatever thing that makes sense to you, make sure they're in the meetings. So please, please, before you log off of Zoom, but before you leave this document, click on that link, take, I would say, 3 to 4 minutes, and give us some feedback, please, about how to make these calls better, both for call 4 tomorrow and then for the week 2 calls next week. And if you have a reminder to share, an invitation, a request for peer assist, or your own resource to share, go ahead and throw it in the notes as well. Abby, any final thoughts?
That was great. Huge thanks for how all of you showed up today. Next week, we'll be talking about community care, which I think is really important during a crisis. So I hope you can join us. And yeah, then we have 2 more weeks after that. But if you registered, I'll be sending an email on Friday with the recordings and the notes. So you can take another look and see if people from the other calls have said anything interesting or have replied to you. Yeah, but thank you so much. This is a great conversation. It's such a lovely group.
Thank you all for joining
Thanks,
us.
y'all. Be well and safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.